September 7, 1940. 4:43 in the afternoon. A young woman named Barbara Nixon was walking through Finsbury in East London when she heard the air raid sirens begin their wail. She had heard them dozens of times before over the past year. Always false alarms. Always practice drills. The war had been going on for a year, but London had seen no bombs. Barbara looked up at the eastern sky and saw something that made her blood freeze. Wave after wave after wave of German aircraft. More planes than she had ever seen in her life. The sky was black with them. 348 bombers escorted by 617 fighters. Nearly 1,000 aircraft heading straight for London. Then the bombs began to fall. For the next 57 consecutive nights, German bombers would return to London. Every single night. No exceptions. No breaks. No mercy. By the time it ended in May 1941, more than 43,000 British civilians would be dead. More than 1 million homes would be destroyed or damaged. Entire neighborhoods would cease to exist. Hitler believed he could break British morale. He believed he could force Britain to surrender through terror from the sky. He believed he could do what his armies and his navy could not do. Bring Britain to its knees. He was wrong. This is the story of the Blitz. Not just the statistics and the destruction, but what it was actually like to live through it. How ordinary people survived. How a nation held together when everything was falling apart. And how Britain's refusal to break changed the course of World War II. To understand the Blitz, we need to go back to September 1939 when the war began. Everyone in Britain expected bombing. Everyone. The government had prepared for it. They had distributed gas masks to every civilian. They had dug trenches in public parks. They had planned for mass evacuation of children from cities. The experts predicted catastrophe. Government planners estimated that German bombing would kill 600,000 people in the first 6 months. They calculated that each ton of bombs dropped would cause 50 casualties. They prepared for complete societal breakdown. So when war was declared on September 3, 1939, people braced themselves. And nothing happened. The period from September 1939 to April 1940 became known as the Phony War. Britain and Germany were officially at war, but almost no fighting occurred. German aircraft didn't bomb British cities. British aircraft didn't bomb German cities. Both sides held back. The reasons were partly strategic and partly moral. Both governments feared retaliation. Both worried about public opinion. Both remembered the horror of World War I and hoped somehow to keep this war limited. That illusion shattered in April 1940 when Germany invaded Norway and Denmark. In May, Germany invaded Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The Blitzkrieg. Lightning War. German forces smashed through Allied defenses with speed and violence nobody had anticipated. By June, France had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had been evacuated from Dunkirk. Britain stood alone. Hitler did not particularly want to fight Britain. He had hoped Britain would accept Germany's dominance of Europe and negotiate peace. Britain had its empire. Germany would have Europe. They could coexist. Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister on May 10, 1940, rejected any negotiation. Britain would fight on alone. Britain would never surrender. This left Hitler with a problem. Germany could not invade Britain without control of the air. The Royal Navy was too powerful. German ships could not cross the Channel safely. But if the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, could destroy the Royal Air Force, then perhaps an invasion could succeed. Operation Sea Lion was the planned invasion of Britain. But first came Operation Eagle Attack. The Luftwaffe would destroy the RAF. They would achieve air superiority. Then the invasion could proceed. Through July and August 1940, German aircraft attacked RAF airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. The Battle of Britain. Fighter against fighter in the skies over southern England. The RAF fought desperately. They were outnumbered, but they had advantages. They were fighting over home territory. Downed pilots who survived could return to duty. British radar gave early warning of German attacks. British factories were producing new aircraft as quickly as old ones were destroyed. By early September, the RAF was exhausted but still fighting. German losses were mounting. The Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority. Then, on August 24, 1940, German bombers accidentally dropped bombs on London during a night raid. They were supposed to hit military targets outside the city. They missed. Bombs fell on civilian neighborhoods in East London. Churchill immediately ordered a retaliatory raid on Berlin. British bombers attacked the German capital on August 25. Hitler was furious. Berlin was supposed to be immune from attack. He had promised the German people they would never be bombed. Now British aircraft had made a liar of him. On September 4, Hitler gave a speech at the Sport Palace in Berlin. He said, "If they attack our cities, we will raze theirs to the ground." 3 days later, the Luftwaffe came to London. September 7, 1940, started as a beautiful late summer day. Clear skies. Warm sun. Londoners went about their Saturday routines. Shopping. Visiting friends. Enjoying the weather. At RAF Fighter Command Headquarters in Bentley Priory, radar operators noticed something unusual around 4 p.m. Large formations of aircraft were assembling over northern France. Very large formations. At 4:30 p.m., the formations began moving across the channel. Every available RAF fighter squadron was scrambled. Pilots ran to their Spitfires and Hurricanes expecting another attack on their airfields. At 4:43 p.m., air raid sirens began wailing across London. People looked up and saw the sky filled with German aircraft. The bombers came in 2 waves. 348 bombers in the first wave. 250 bombers in the second wave. They were escorted by 617 fighter aircraft. The escort fighters stayed high, protecting the bombers from RAF interceptors. The bombers flew straight toward East London. The primary targets were the London docks, the Royal Docks, the Surrey Docks, the West India Docks, Silver Town. These docks handled most of Britain's imports. Food, raw materials, fuel. Everything an island nation needed to survive. But the docks were surrounded by working-class residential neighborhoods. Narrow streets. Densely packed houses. Tens of thousands of people living within a few hundred yards of the target areas. The bombers released their payloads. High-explosive bombs to destroy buildings. Incendiary bombs to start fires. The bombs fell in clusters across a wide area. A docker named Bill Regan was working at the Royal Victoria Dock when the bombs began falling. He remembered the ground shaking. Buildings collapsing. Cranes toppling into the water. Fire erupting everywhere. The Surrey docks held enormous quantities of timber. Canadian softwood. Scandinavian hardwood. Millions of board feet of lumber stored in vast stacks. The incendiary bombs ignited it. Within minutes, the entire Surrey docks complex was ablaze. The fire was visible for miles. A column of black smoke rose thousands of feet into the air. The flames lit up the eastern sky. Civilians throughout London could see the glow. They knew something terrible was happening in the East End. The London Fire Brigade had prepared for bombing. They had practiced. They had coordinated with local authorities. They thought they were ready. They were not ready for this. Fire stations received hundreds of calls simultaneously. Every phone line was jammed. Dispatchers could not keep track of where crews were needed. Fire trucks raced toward the East End from all over London. When they arrived, they found scenes beyond their worst nightmares. Entire streets engulfed in flames. Water mains broken. No water pressure. They could not fight the fires effectively. All they could do was try to contain them. Ambulances could not reach many areas. Rubble blocked the streets. Fire blocked the streets. Unexploded bombs blocked the streets. The wounded had to be carried out on stretchers through the chaos. The afternoon raid ended around 6:30 p.m. Londoners hoped that was it. They began emerging from shelters to assess the damage. Then, at 8:10 p.m., the siren sounded again. The second wave arrived. 250 bombers. They did not need to navigate. They simply flew toward the enormous fires burning in East London. The fires served as a beacon visible for 100 miles. The bombers flew individually rather than in formation. They came in from different directions at different altitudes. This made them harder for anti-aircraft guns to target. It also spread the bombing over a wider area. They dropped their bombs and flew home. Then more bombers came. And more. And more. All night long, bombs fell on London. Every few minutes, another aircraft would appear overhead. Another stick of bombs would whistle down. Another building would explode. In the shelters? Thousands of Londoners spent that first night in public shelters. Others sheltered in their basements. Some huddled under their stairs. The government had distributed Anderson shelters, small corrugated metal structures that families could bury in their back gardens, but many people had not installed them or did not trust them. The tube stations were not officially designated as shelters. The government had initially forbidden people from sheltering in them. Officials worried about a shelter mentality developing. They wanted people to continue normal life as much as possible. But on the night of September 7th, thousands of East Enders simply walked into the nearest tube station and refused to leave. What were the authorities going to do? Forcibly remove terrified families while bombs were falling? The government gave in. The tube stations became shelters. The all-clear sounded at 4:30 a.m. on September 8. Londoners emerged to see what had happened to their city. The East End was devastated. Entire streets no longer existed. Buildings had been blown apart. Fires still burned in dozens of locations. The smoke was so thick it blocked out the morning sun. 430 people had been killed. 1,600 were seriously injured. Thousands more had minor injuries. Nobody knew exactly how many were missing beneath the rubble. More than 1,000 fires had been started. 9 of them were classified as conflagrations. Fires so large they merged together and created their own weather patterns. Firestorms. The Royal Docks were heavily damaged. The Surrey docks were still burning. They would burn for days. Silvertown was obliterated. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. Thousands were damaged beyond repair. But the bombing was not over. It had only just begun. September 8, 1940. Evening. The siren sounded again. German bombers returned. Night 2. September 9th. They came again. Night 3. September 10th. Again. Night 4. September 11th. Again. Night 5. Every single night. Without exception. For 57 consecutive nights, German bombers attacked London. Not all the raids were as heavy as that first night. Some nights only a few dozen bombers came. Other nights, hundreds arrived. But every night, bombs fell on London. Londoners began to understand this was not going to stop. This was their new reality. Every sunset brought bombers. Every night brought terror. People had to adjust. They had no choice. You cannot evacuate an entire city of 8 million people. Most had jobs they could not abandon. They had homes they could not leave. They had to find ways to survive. A routine developed. During the day, people went to work. Shops opened. Buses ran. Offices functioned. London tried to maintain normal operations. As evening approached, people began preparing. They gathered essential items. Food. Water. Blankets. Valuables. Medical supplies. They checked their gas masks. They made sure their blackout curtains were ready. When the siren sounded, they headed for shelter. Public shelters. Tube stations. Church crypts. Basements, whatever protection they could find. Then they waited. Hours in crowded, dark, damp spaces. Listening to the bombs fall. Feeling the concussions. Wondering if the next one would be the one that killed them. When the all clear finally sounded, they emerged. They checked if their homes still existed. They went to work. They repeated the cycle. The London Underground became the defining image of the Blitz. Photographs show thousands of people sleeping on platform floors. Families with blankets and pillows. Children sleeping while adults kept watch. Entire communities packed into the tunnels. The conditions were terrible. The tube stations were not designed as shelters. They had no toilets adequate for thousands of people. No ventilation systems for overnight occupation. No proper medical facilities. The smell was overwhelming. Thousands of unwashed bodies in confined spaces. Chemical toilets overflowing. Food going bad. Cigarette smoke thick in the air. Disease spread easily. Influenza. Dysentery. Tuberculosis. Respiratory infections. Skin infections. Public health officials worried about epidemics. But people kept coming because the tubes felt safe. Deep underground. Solid construction. Far from the surface. The psychological comfort outweighed the physical discomfort. Tube station communities developed. People claimed regular spots. They established unwritten rules and hierarchies. Entertainment committees formed. Some stations had small libraries. Musicians played instruments. People sang songs. The tube shelter experience became a source of national pride. Look at the British people. Suffering terrible conditions. Facing death every night. But maintaining their spirits. Singing. Laughing. Carrying on. That image was partly propaganda and partly true. People were suffering. They were terrified. But they were also adapting. Finding ways to cope. Supporting each other. Refusing to surrender to despair. The term bombed out became common. It described people whose homes had been destroyed. Thousands joined this category every week. Rest centers were established to provide emergency accommodation. Schools. Church halls. Any large building that could house people temporarily. The bombed out would arrive with whatever they had managed to save. Often just the clothes they wore. Rest centers provided meals, clothing, and a place to sleep. But they were overcrowded and chaotic. Local authorities struggled to keep up. The scale of destruction overwhelmed the prepared response. Many bombed out families moved in with relatives. Spare rooms filled up. Living rooms became bedrooms. 3 or 4 families might share a single house. Others left London entirely. Evacuation resumed. Parents who had brought their children back during the phony war now sent them away again. More than 1.4 million people left London during the Blitz. An enormous problem was unexploded bombs. UXBs in military terminology. Bombs that landed but did not detonate. They were everywhere. Thousands of them. Some UXBs had faulty fuses. Some landed softly in mud or sand. Some had delayed action fuses designed to explode hours or days later to maximize disruption. Every UXB had to be treated as extremely dangerous. Areas around them were evacuated. Traffic was rerouted. Bomb disposal teams were called. The bomb disposal teams became heroes. Mostly Royal Engineers. They had to approach bombs that could explode at any moment. They had to carefully dig down to expose the bomb. They had to identify the fuse type. They had to attempt to defuse it. The work was incredibly dangerous. Hundreds of bomb disposal personnel were killed during the Blitz. They saved countless lives. Without them, London would have been paralyzed. The German bombing strategy evolved quickly. High-explosive bombs caused dramatic destruction, but incendiary bombs were more effective at creating sustained damage. Incendiary bombs were small, about the size of a thermos. They were filled with thermite that burned at extremely high temperatures. Hundreds could be packed into a single bomb canister. When released, they scattered over a wide area. When they hit roofs, they burned through into attics and upper floors. If not extinguished immediately, they would set buildings ablaze. Many buildings. Simultaneously. Across entire neighborhoods. Firefighters could not be everywhere at once. A single fire crew could put out a few incendiaries. But when dozens ignited across their area within minutes, they had to prioritize. Some fires would be left to burn. Individual building fires merged into street fires. Street fires merged into district fires. The September 7th raid had proven this tactic worked. The government organized firewatching duties. Building owners were required to have people watching for incendiaries. Office workers. Apartment residents. Shop owners. They had to remain in buildings during raids with buckets of sand and water to extinguish incendiaries before they could take hold. This was dangerous work. Firewatchers were exposed on roofs and upper floors during bombing raids. Many were killed or injured. But they saved thousands of buildings. London's anti-aircraft defences were substantial but largely ineffective. Hundreds of guns were positioned around the city. They fired thousands of rounds every night. The guns made noise. They made people feel something was being done. But they shot down very few German aircraft. The bombers flew too high. They flew too fast. The guns could not accurately predict where the aircraft would be by the time the shell reached altitude. The shell fragments falling back to Earth were almost as dangerous as the German bombs. People were killed by falling shrapnel. The government warned people to stay undercover even during anti-aircraft fire. Barrage balloons were more effective as deterrents. Large hydrogen-filled balloons tethered to the ground by steel cables. They forced German aircraft to fly higher, which reduced bombing accuracy. Searchlights crisscrossed the night sky trying to illuminate German aircraft. When they caught a bomber in their beam, anti-aircraft guns concentrated fire on that location. Occasionally they succeeded in shooting down an aircraft. More often they did not. RAF night fighters tried to intercept the bombers. But night fighting was extremely difficult with 1940 technology. No radar-equipped night fighters existed yet. Pilots had to rely on visual acquisition in darkness. Most nights, they never found the German aircraft. The German bombers operated with relative impunity through most of the Blitz. Hitler's strategy was not primarily to destroy London's infrastructure. The real target was British morale. The German High Command believed that sustained terror bombing would break civilian will to fight. People would demand their government negotiate peace. Political pressure would force Churchill to surrender. This strategy was based on faulty assumptions. German planners assumed British society would react the way they imagined they would react. Mass panic. Breakdown of authority. Collapse of public order. They were wrong about the British character. Or perhaps they were wrong about human nature in general. Bombing did not break morale. It hardened it. The more London suffered, the more determined people became. Surrender was never seriously considered by the civilian population. This does not mean people were fearless. They were terrified. Many suffered from severe psychological trauma. Sleep deprivation was universal. Anxiety disorders were common. But terror did not translate into defeatism. British propaganda emphasized fortitude. London can take it. Keep calm and carry on. We will never surrender. These were not empty slogans. They reflected genuine public sentiment. German intelligence failed to understand this. They kept bombing, expecting morale to crack. It never did. London was not the only target. Beginning in October 1940, the Luftwaffe expanded attacks to other cities. Birmingham was bombed heavily. Its munitions factories made it a military target. Coventry suffered a devastating raid on November 14 that destroyed much of the medieval city centre and killed 568 people. The word Coventry entered German military vocabulary to describe complete destruction. Liverpool and the Merseyside docks were attacked repeatedly. Liverpool was Britain's most important port for Atlantic convoys. Destroying it would strangle Britain's supply lines. Manchester, Sheffield, Bristol, Southampton, Plymouth, Glasgow, Belfast. Every major industrial city was hit. The Blitz was a national experience, not just a London experience. Smaller cities and towns were also bombed, sometimes by mistake when German aircraft got lost or dumped their bombs randomly before fleeing home. The nationwide bombing reinforced national unity. This was not happening to London alone. All of Britain was under attack. All of Britain was resisting together. Descriptions of bombing often focus on statistics and strategy. But what was it actually like to be there when the bombs fell? First came the sirens. That distinctive rising and falling wail. It triggered an immediate physical response. Heart rate spiking. Adrenaline flooding the system. Even people who had heard it hundreds of times never became completely immune to that primal fear response. You had perhaps 10 to 15 minutes before the bombers arrived. Enough time to reach shelter if you moved quickly. Not enough time to hesitate or debate. Then came the sounds. The drone of aircraft engines. Hundreds of them. A deep, sustained rumble that you felt in your chest as much as heard with your ears. Then the anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Sharp cracks. Constant barrage. Loud enough to make conversation impossible. Then the bombs. High-explosive bombs made a distinctive whistling sound as they fell. That whistle meant one was close. Very close. You never heard the bomb that killed you. If you heard the whistle, you might survive. The explosion was both sound and physical force. The air itself became a weapon. The blast wave hit you like a solid object. It could throw people across rooms. Burst eardrums. Collapse lungs. Buildings did not always collapse immediately. Sometimes the structure held for a few seconds. Walls cracked. Ceilings sagged. Then everything came down at once in a roar of falling brick and timber. Inside shelters, you could not see what was happening. You could only hear and feel. The ground shook with each nearby impact. Dust fell from ceilings. People held each other. Prayed. Waited for the next explosion. When the all clear finally sounded and you emerged from shelter, you had no idea what you would find. Your home might be intact. It might be damaged. It might be gone. The streets would be covered in rubble and broken glass. Hundreds of thousands of windows shattered during each raid. Glass was everywhere. It crunched under your feet. Glittered in the weak morning light. The smell was distinctive. Brick dust. Smoke. Gas from broken mains. Sewage from broken pipes. The acrid chemical smell of high explosives. That smell soaked into clothing and hair and skin. You could not escape it. Some buildings looked intact from the outside but were gutted internally. Others had bizarre damage patterns. The entire front wall blown off but the interior intact like a dollhouse. Furniture sitting normally in rooms open to the street. Bodies were pulled from the rubble. Recovery teams worked systematically through collapsed buildings. Sometimes they found survivors. More often they found the dead. The bodies were taken to mortuaries. Identification was difficult. Many people carried identity cards, but not always. Families searching for missing relatives had to view bodies. It was traumatic work. One psychological aspect of the Blitz that does not receive enough attention is the arbitrariness of survival. You could follow all the safety rules. Take shelter. Stay away from windows. Do everything right. And still die because a bomb landed directly on your shelter. Or you could ignore all precautions. Stay in bed. Refuse to take shelter. And survive because the bombs fell on other neighborhoods that night. There was no way to protect yourself completely. No amount of care or caution could guarantee survival. You could be killed at any moment for no reason. This created a particular kind of psychological stress. In battle, soldiers have some agency. They can take cover, return fire, influence outcomes. Civilians under bombing had no agency. They could only endure. Some people became fatalistic. If a bomb had your name on it, there was nothing you could do. Might as well sleep in your own bed rather than a miserable shelter. Others became obsessive about safety, following elaborate rituals, carrying good luck charms, convinced their specific behaviors kept them alive. Both responses were attempts to impose psychological order on chaos. Children experienced the Blitz differently than adults. Many were evacuated, separated from their parents, sent to live with strangers in the countryside. The evacuated children were often treated well. Many had positive experiences. But the separation was traumatic. Parents did not know if their children were safe. Children did not know if their parents survived each night. Children who remained in cities had their lives completely disrupted. Schools closed. Normal routines vanished. Play became dangerous. Unexploded bombs made playgrounds lethal. Some children found the Blitz exciting. It was dramatic. Adults were scared, which gave children a sense of importance. They collected shrapnel, explored bomb buildings, treated it as an adventure. But nighttime was different. The fear was real. The danger was real. Many children developed severe anxiety. Bedwetting became common even among older children. Nightmares, clinging behavior, psychological trauma that would last for years. Parents tried to maintain normalcy. Birthday celebrations in shelters. Christmas presents even when money was scarce. Bedtime stories by candlelight underground. Small acts of normality in an abnormal situation. Women's experiences during the Blitz deserve particular attention. They carried enormous burdens. Women were responsible for maintaining households under impossible conditions. They had to queue for food with constant shortages. Cook meals with limited ingredients. Keep homes clean when water supplies were disrupted. Care for children while terrified for their safety. Many women also worked outside the home. Munitions factories. Government offices. Hospitals. They worked full days, then came home to family responsibilities, then spent nights in shelters. Women served as air raid wardens, fire watchers, ambulance drivers, nurses. They pulled people from rubble. They provided first aid. They drove through bombing raids to reach casualties. The propaganda image of British women during the Blitz emphasized cheerful resilience. Carry on. The reality was exhaustion and fear managed with remarkable strength. One woman, a mother of 3 in Stepney, wrote in her diary, "I am so tired I could cry. But there is no time for crying. Children must be fed. Husband must go to work. House must be managed. We simply carry on because there is nothing else to do." That captured the experience for millions of women. One positive aspect of the Blitz was the strengthening of community bonds. People helped each other in ways that peacetime discouraged. When a building was hit, neighbors immediately began rescue efforts. They did not wait for official rescue teams. They dug with their bare hands, formed human chains to pass rubble, risked their lives to save others. Bombing destroyed class barriers to some extent. A bomb did not care if you were rich or poor. Wealthy neighborhoods suffered alongside working-class neighborhoods. Shelters mixed social classes. A factory worker might find himself sheltering next to a banker. A cleaning woman might comfort a wealthy widow. Shared danger created shared identity. Tea became a symbol of resilience. After a raid, volunteers would appear with mobile canteens serving hot tea. This was more than refreshment. It was comfort. Normality. A signal that civilization continued. The WVS, the Women's Voluntary Service, ran these mobile canteens. They appeared wherever bombing occurred. Tea and sandwiches for rescue workers. For survivors. For anyone who needed it. That cup of tea served in a bombed-out street became an iconic image. British determination in a teacup. Not everyone behaved heroically. The Blitz also brought out opportunism and criminality. Looting was a serious problem. Thieves would enter bombed buildings and steal whatever they could find. Jewelry. Cash. Food. Personal belongings. They robbed the dead and the living indiscriminately. Some looters worked in organized gangs. They would follow bombing raids, knowing police and rescue services would be overwhelmed. They would systematically strip buildings before anyone could stop them. The penalties for looting were severe. Long prison sentences. Public shaming. But the crime continued because the opportunities were enormous and enforcement was difficult. Black market activity flourished. Rationing created scarcity. Scarcity created demand. The black market supplied what legal channels could not. Forged ration books were common. Stolen goods were sold. Bribes secured scarce items. Building contractors overcharged for repairs. Landlords exploited the bombed out with inflated rents. Most people remained honest. But enough engaged in criminal activity that it became a significant problem. The British government understood that morale was crucial. If civilian morale collapsed, the war effort would collapse. Censorship was strict. Newspapers could not report specific locations of bomb damage. They could not publish photographs showing mass casualties. They could not reveal the scale of destruction. This was partly for security reasons. German intelligence monitored British media. But it was also about morale. The government did not want people to understand how bad things really were. Official casualty figures were released weekly rather than nightly. This made each night's toll seem less severe. The cumulative effect was hidden in aggregated statistics. Propaganda emphasized resilience and courage. Newsreels showed bombed families smiling. Photos showed people drinking tea in the rubble. Stories highlighted incredible survival tales rather than mass death. The propaganda was effective. It shaped how the Blitz was remembered. The image of cheerful Londoners singing in tube stations. The mythology of a nation united and unbreakable. That mythology contained truth. British morale did hold. The country did not collapse. Resistance did continue. But the propaganda obscured the suffering. The terror. The trauma. The very real fear that Britain might lose. December 29, 1940, was a Sunday night. The Luftwaffe launched a massive incendiary attack on the City of London, the financial district. Timing was deliberate. Sunday night meant buildings were empty. Offices were closed. Few firewatchers were on duty. Incendiary bombs would burn unchecked longer before discovery. The attack was devastating. More than 100,000 incendiary bombs fell on 1 square mile. The City of London became an inferno. St. Paul's Cathedral was hit by dozens of incendiaries. Fire crews and volunteers fought desperately to save it. One incendiary lodged in the dome. If it ignited the timber structure inside, the cathedral would be destroyed. A volunteer climbed up into the dome during the raid. He found the incendiary. It was wedged in a narrow space. He pried it loose with his bare hands. Threw it outside where it could burn harmlessly. The cathedral survived. The photograph of St. Paul's dome rising above the smoke and flames became one of the most iconic images of the Blitz. It symbolized survival. Endurance. Britain would not fall. But the area around St. Paul's was destroyed. 8 Wren churches burned. The Guildhall was gutted. Publishing houses on Paternoster Row burned with all their books. Centuries of history consumed in a single night. The December 29th raid killed 163 people. It destroyed more buildings than the Great Fire of London in 1666. It proved the vulnerability of British cities to concentrated incendiary attack. Through January and February 1941, the raids continued. London remained the primary target, but other cities were hit heavily. Portsmouth, Plymouth, and Swansea suffered particularly severe raids. These port cities were crucial to Britain's Atlantic supply lines. The Luftwaffe tried to close them. The port cities endured terrible damage. Plymouth lost 1,200 people. More than 3,700 buildings were destroyed. The city centre was flattened. But the ports kept functioning. Rubble was cleared. Bombs were defused. Ships were unloaded. The flow of supplies continued. This illustrated a fundamental problem with the German bombing strategy. Bombing could destroy buildings and kill people. But it could not paralyze a determined nation. Factories were hit but returned to production within days or weeks. Workers showed up even after losing their homes. Alternative transportation was arranged when rail lines were cut. People adapted. The German High Command gradually realized that bombing alone would not defeat Britain. More resources would be needed. Heavier raids. Longer campaigns. Germany did not have unlimited resources. The heaviest raids of the Blitz came in April and May 1941. The Luftwaffe launched maximum effort attacks attempting to achieve what previous raids had not. The night of April 16th to 17th saw one of the war's heaviest raids on London. More than 450 bombers attacked. Over 1,000 people were killed in a single night. The raid created another firestorm. Fires burned out of control across South London. The emergency services were completely overwhelmed. Fire crews from outside London had to be called in. That raid came close to breaking London's firefighting capacity. If the Germans had maintained that intensity for several more nights, the cumulative damage might have made the city unlivable. But they did not maintain it. German resources were being redirected. Hitler was preparing to invade the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa required enormous air support. The Luftwaffe had to redeploy eastward. The final major raid on London came the night of May 10 to 11, 1941. It was the heaviest raid of the entire Blitz. 505 German bombers attacked. They dropped 711 tons of high explosive and thousands of incendiaries. That night, 1,436 Londoners were killed. More than 1,800 were seriously injured. It was the single deadliest night of the Blitz. The House of Commons was hit. The chamber where Churchill gave his speeches was destroyed. The historic chamber that had stood for centuries was gutted by fire. Only the shell remained. Westminster Abbey was hit. British Museum was hit. The Tower of London was hit. Every major London railway station was hit. More than 2,000 fires were started. The fire service recorded their highest casualty rate of the entire war that night. The water mains broke across large areas of the city. Fire crews had no water pressure. They watched buildings burn that they could have saved if they had water. The Thames was at low tide. Pumping from the river was difficult. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. When dawn came on May 11th, large sections of London were still burning. The smoke was visible from 100 miles away. The destruction exceeded even September 7th. Londoners emerged from shelters expecting the raids to continue that night. They steeled themselves for another terrible night. They prepared for night 245 of consecutive bombing. But the bombers did not come. May 11th, 1941, was the last major raid on London. The Blitz was over, though nobody knew it at the time. The Blitz ended not because it succeeded or failed, but because Hitler needed his bombers elsewhere. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, was scheduled for June 22, 1941. This would be the largest military operation in human history. More than 3 million German soldiers. Thousands of tanks. And crucially, thousands of aircraft. The Luftwaffe could not support a massive Eastern Front campaign while simultaneously bombing Britain every night. Resources were finite. Choices had to be made. Hitler chose to prioritize the Soviet invasion. The bombing of Britain would continue, but at much lower intensity. Occasional raids rather than nightly attacks. The strategic calculation was that Britain was contained. Britain could not invade Europe. Britain could not threaten Germany directly. Britain was isolated. Defeated Britain could wait. The Soviet Union could not wait. This decision would prove to be one of Hitler's greatest strategic errors. Britain survived. Britain remained in the war. Britain became the base for the eventual liberation of Europe. But in May 1941, that was still years in the future. All Londoners knew was that the nightmare had finally ended. The statistics of the Blitz are staggering. From September 7, 1940 to May 11, 1941, German aircraft dropped approximately 18,800 tons of high-explosive bombs on London. Countless thousands of incendiary bombs. Exact numbers were never calculated. 43,000 British civilians were killed during the Blitz. More than half of those deaths occurred in London. 139,000 were injured. More than 1 million homes were destroyed or damaged. Large sections of British cities simply ceased to exist. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. Centuries of architecture were lost. The physical reconstruction would take decades. But the human cost transcended statistics. Tens of thousands of children were orphaned. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. Families were shattered. Communities were destroyed. The psychological trauma affected an entire generation. People who lived through the Blitz carried that experience for the rest of their lives. Nightmares. Anxiety. Hypervigilance. What we now call PTSD was almost universal among Blitz survivors. Many never spoke about their experiences. They buried the trauma. Got on with life. The British cultural expectation was to not complain. To carry on. Many people suffered in silence for decades. From a strategic military perspective, the Blitz was a complete failure. Hitler's objective was to break British morale and force surrender. British morale did not break. Britain did not surrender. The bombing disrupted British life but did not cripple British capacity to wage war. Factories continued production. Ports continued operations. The government continued functioning. Britain's food supplies were never seriously threatened by the bombing. The blockade by U-boats was far more dangerous than bombing of ports. The Royal Air Force was not destroyed. Fighter Command remained operational throughout the Blitz. In fact, RAF strength increased during this period as new aircraft were produced faster than losses. The Luftwaffe suffered significant losses. Approximately 600 German aircraft were shot down during the Blitz. Hundreds more were damaged. Experienced crews were killed or captured. These losses hurt the Luftwaffe's effectiveness later in the war. Most importantly, the Blitz united British public opinion. Before September 1940, there were small peace movements. Some politicians advocated negotiation. The bombing eliminated those voices. After the Blitz, the entire nation was committed to fighting until Germany was defeated. Hitler had achieved the opposite of his intention. Instead of breaking British will, he had hardened it. Instead of isolating Churchill politically, he had made Churchill a national hero. Instead of demonstrating German power, he had revealed German limitations. Winston Churchill's leadership during the Blitz was crucial to British survival. Churchill visited bombed areas constantly. He walked through the rubble. He talked to survivors. He inspected damage. He was highly visible. The famous photograph of Churchill standing in the ruins giving his V for victory sign became a symbol of defiance. Churchill embodied British resistance. His presence told people they had not been abandoned. Their suffering was seen. Their courage was recognized. Churchill's speeches during this period are among the finest in the English language. He gave voice to what people were feeling. He acknowledged the suffering. He honored the sacrifice. He promised victory. On September 11, 1940, after the first days of bombing, Churchill broadcast to the nation. He said the bombing was a test of endurance. The British people must show they could take it. And they were showing exactly that. He said, "These cruel, wanton, indiscriminate bombings of London are, of course, a part of Hitler's invasion plans. He hopes, by killing large numbers of civilians, and women and children, that he will terrorize and cow the people of this mighty imperial city. Little does he know the spirit of the British nation, or the tough fiber of the Londoners." Those words captured the moment perfectly. They were not empty rhetoric. They reflected reality. The British were tough. They were not cowed. They would not surrender. Churchill's leadership gave people something to hold on to. A reason to endure. A belief that suffering had purpose. The Blitz created a powerful mythology that shaped British national identity for generations. The myth emphasized unity. Britain standing together. Class barriers dissolving. Everyone equal under the bombs. This was partly true and partly exaggeration. The myth emphasized cheerfulness. Londoners singing in the tube. Making jokes. Keeping their spirits up. This was partly true. British humor did help people cope. But it was not the whole story. The myth emphasized invincibility. London could take it. British morale could not be broken. This was largely true. But it obscured the very real fear and suffering people experienced. The mythology served important purposes. It gave meaning to suffering. It created national pride. It provided lessons for future generations about resilience and determination. But the mythology also sanitized the reality. It made the Blitz seem almost noble. A grand test passed with flying colors. This obscured the randomness of the death. The terror of the experience. The trauma that lasted for decades. Veterans of the Blitz often had complicated relationships with this mythology. They were proud of what they had endured. But they also knew the reality was more complex than the myth suggested. One woman who survived the bombing of her East End home said years later, "We're told we were heroes. But we weren't heroes. We were just people trying not to die. We didn't have a choice. You make it sound like we were brave. We were terrified." That complexity deserves recognition. The British people during the Blitz were both brave and terrified. Resilient and traumatized. Unified and divided. All of these things at once. When the heavy raids finally ended in May 1941, Britain faced the enormous task of rebuilding. More than 1 million homes needed repair or reconstruction. Entire city districts had to be replanned. Infrastructure had to be restored. The physical scars would take years to heal. But the psychological scars would take even longer. An entire population had been traumatized. Children grew up in an atmosphere of constant danger. Adults carried stress that never fully dissipated. The National Health Service, established in 1948, was partly a response to the Blitz. The wartime experience revealed that national health crises required national responses. The Blitz demonstrated the need for universal healthcare available to everyone. The welfare state itself was partly inspired by the Blitz experience. If the nation could mobilize to protect people during war, why not mobilize to protect people during peace? Shared sacrifice during the Blitz created expectations of shared prosperity. The Blitz taught military strategists important lessons about strategic bombing. Terror bombing of civilians does not break morale. It hardens morale. This lesson was learned by Germany and should have been learned by the Allies. But it was not. The Allies would later conduct their own strategic bombing campaigns against Germany and Japan. Dresden, Hamburg, Tokyo. These raids killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. The stated justification was that breaking civilian morale would shorten the war. But the Blitz had already proved this assumption wrong. German civilian morale did not break under Allied bombing, just as British morale had not broken under German bombing. Humans are more resilient than planners assume. They adapt. They endure. They find ways to survive. Terror creates anger more often than surrender. The nuclear age would add new dimensions to these questions. Nuclear weapons made city destruction instantaneous rather than incremental. But the fundamental question remained. Could bombing of civilians win wars? The Blitz became central to British cultural memory of World War II. Films, books, and television shows depicted the Blitz repeatedly. The Blitz spirit became shorthand for British resilience. Politicians invoked it during crises. It became a reference point for national character. The mythology sometimes obscured reality. The Blitz was brutal. People died randomly. Families were destroyed. Suffering was immense. But the mythology emphasized courage and unity. This created tension for survivors. Their actual experiences often did not match the mythologized version. They remembered fear and chaos more than courage and unity. But admitting that felt like betraying the national narrative. Younger generations learned about the Blitz as a story of triumph. Their elders had stood firm against Hitler. Britain had won. That pride was genuine and deserved. But it was incomplete. As decades passed, Blitz survivors aged. Their numbers dwindled. Each year fewer remained to share their memories. Many survivors never talked about their experiences until late in life. The trauma was too deep. The memories too painful. But as they grew older, many felt compelled to speak. To record what happened. To ensure the younger generations understood. Oral history projects collected thousands of survivor testimonies. These interviews revealed details the official histories missed. The fear. The exhaustion. The randomness. The small acts of kindness that kept people going. One recurring theme in survivor testimonies is luck. Everyone who survived acknowledged they were lucky. The bomb that hit the neighbor's house instead of theirs. The night they stayed with relatives across town. The shelter that held when others collapsed. Luck made the difference between life and death. That recognition of luck created complicated feelings. Guilt that they survived when others died. Awareness that their survival was arbitrary. No amount of courage or preparation guaranteed survival. They had simply been lucky. Physical reminders of the Blitz remain throughout British cities. Vacant lots where buildings once stood. Modern structures next to Victorian buildings because everything between was destroyed and rebuilt. Plaques marking locations of significant damage. In London, you can still see shrapnel scars on buildings. Pockmarks in stone walls from bomb fragments. These scars are preserved as historical reminders. Some bomb sites were never redeveloped. They became parks or parking lots. The land itself bears witness to what happened there. Underground, the shelters remain. Many tube stations still have the platforms where thousands slept. Some have been preserved as historical sites. Others function as normal stations, but older Londoners remember when they were shelters. How should we remember the Blitz? This question matters because memory shapes identity. If we remember only the courage and resilience, we risk romanticizing war. We risk making it seem survivable. Manageable. We risk encouraging future leaders to think civilian populations can endure bombing. If we remember only the suffering and trauma, we risk obscuring the genuine human strength displayed. People did endure. They did support each other. They did refuse to surrender. That deserves recognition. Perhaps the answer is to remember both. The Blitz was horrific and people were remarkable. These truths coexist. 43,000 dead. More than 1 million homes destroyed. Immense suffering. And also, a nation that did not break. Communities that supported each other. A people who endured. The Blitz remains relevant because civilians still die in bombing campaigns. Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, Gaza. Modern wars still target cities. Civilians still shelter underground. Families still flee their homes. The lessons of the Blitz apply to contemporary conflicts. Bombing civilians does not achieve political objectives. It creates resentment and hardens resistance. It causes immense suffering without military benefit. But nations continue strategic bombing anyway. Modern technology makes it more accurate but not more humane. Precision-guided weapons still kill civilians. Drones still destroy homes. The methods change but the suffering remains. The Blitz also remains relevant because it demonstrates human resilience. When we see contemporary populations enduring bombing, we can understand they will survive. They will adapt. They will rebuild. Not because war is acceptable but because humans are stronger than weapons designed to break them. Remember that dinner on January 10, 1953, where Churchill told Truman he had misjudged him. Churchill had made a similar journey regarding the British people during the Blitz. In 1940, Churchill did not know if British civilians could withstand sustained bombing. Government planners predicted collapse. Experts warned of mass panic and breakdown of social order. Churchill hoped the British people would stand firm. He believed they would. But he did not know for certain. The Blitz answered that question. The British people could take it. They did take it. They proved stronger than anyone expected, including themselves. Churchill's leadership mattered enormously. His speeches. His presence. His defiance. But ultimately, ordinary people made the choice to endure. They could have demanded surrender. They did not. They chose to fight on. That choice changed history. If Britain had fallen in 1940 or 1941, Nazi Germany would have dominated Europe unchallenged. There would have been no base for the eventual liberation. No launching point for D-Day. No sustained resistance to Hitler. The Blitz failed to break Britain. That failure meant Hitler's Europe would eventually be defeated. The stakes could not have been higher. And ordinary people, suffering in shelters night after night, bore those stakes on their shoulders. Let's return to where we started. September 7, 1940. Barbara Nixon watching the sky fill with German aircraft. Barbara survived the Blitz. She worked as an air raid warden throughout. She pulled people from rubble. She comforted the dying. She helped organize shelters. After the war, she wrote a memoir about her experiences. In her memoir, she wrote about the first night of the Blitz. She remembered thinking this could not be happening. Not to London. Not to Britain. This was the kind of thing that happened in other countries. In Poland. In France. Not here. Then the bombs fell and she realized it was happening. Here. Now. To her. She wrote, "We had no choice but to adapt. To find ways to survive. To help each other. To carry on." That phrase appears again and again in Blitz memoirs. Carry on. It became a cliché. But it was also literally what people did. They carried on because stopping was not an option. The Blitz lasted 57 consecutive nights in London. 8 months of bombing across Britain. 43,000 dead. More than 1 million homes destroyed. Those numbers matter. They represent real people. Real lives ended. Real families shattered. Real suffering. But the numbers alone do not capture the meaning of the Blitz. The meaning is found in the choices people made. To help their neighbors. To show up for work. To maintain community. To refuse surrender. Those choices were not inevitable. People could have chosen differently. They could have collapsed into despair. Turned on each other. Demanded their government negotiate peace at any price. They made the harder choice. To endure. To resist. To believe that suffering had purpose. Whether that belief was justified is a question each generation must answer for themselves. Was the price worth paying? Could Britain have negotiated peace in 1940? Would the world be better or worse if they had? Those are unanswerable questions. We can only observe what actually happened. Britain endured. Hitler failed to break British will. The war continued. Eventually, Germany was defeated. If you take nothing else from this video, remember this: the Blitz was not a story of fearless heroes singing through the bombs. It was a story of ordinary people who were terrified and did extraordinary things anyway. They were not braver than we would be. They were not stronger than we would be. They were people like us, facing circumstances they never imagined, finding strength they did not know they had. That is the real lesson of the Blitz. Not that British people were special, but that ordinary people, when tested beyond endurance, sometimes endure anyway. Winston Churchill said the people of London showed the tough fibre of the Londoners. He was right. But that fibre existed because they chose to make it exist. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is continuing despite fear. For 57 nights, they continued. For 8 months, they continued. They buried their dead, rebuilt their homes, and refused to surrender. Hitler gambled that terror from the sky would break them. He lost that gamble. And because he lost, the course of World War II changed. The course of human history changed. All because ordinary people chose to endure. To help their neighbors. To show up for work. To maintain community. To refuse surrender. Those choices were not inevitable. People could have chosen differently. They could have collapsed into despair. Turned on each other. Demanded their government negotiate peace at any price. They made the harder choice. To endure. To resist. To believe that suffering had purpose. Whether that belief was justified is a question each generation must answer for themselves. Was the price worth paying? Could Britain have negotiated peace in 1940? Would the world be better or worse if they had? Those are unanswerable questions. We can only observe what actually happened. Britain endured. Hitler failed to break British will. The war continued. Eventually, Germany was defeated. If you take nothing else from this video, remember this: the Blitz was not a story of fearless heroes singing through the bombs. It was a story of ordinary people who were terrified and did extraordinary things anyway. They were not braver than we would be. They were not stronger than we would be. They were people like us, facing circumstances they never imagined, finding strength they did not know they had. That is the real lesson of the Blitz. Not that British people were special, but that ordinary people, when tested beyond endurance, sometimes endure anyway. Winston Churchill said the people of London showed the tough fibre of the Londoners. He was right. But that fibre existed because they chose to make it exist. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is continuing despite fear. For 57 nights, they continued. For 8 months, they continued. They buried their dead, rebuilt their homes, and refused to surrender. Hitler gambled that terror from the sky would break them. He lost that gamble. And because he lost, the course of World War II changed. The course of human history changed. All because ordinary people chose to endure. If this video gave you a deeper understanding of the Blitz, hit that subscribe button. Next time, we're covering the Korean War and the battle that most people have never heard of. The Frozen Chosin. American and British forces surrounded by Chinese troops in brutal winter conditions. How they survived is an incredible story. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Should we cover more British history? More American battles? Let me know what you want to see. Thanks for watching. Remember these stories. Remember these people. They deserve to be remembered.